My name is David Smith. I'm the Regional Director here for Small Business Development Center at Texas Tech in Abilene. I'd like to welcome you to our center. We appreciate you being here. What we're going to present this evening, we think is very, very important. And we don't think a lot of people know about this. So it's kind of, as you'll see if you go through the presentation, it's pretty critical. I don't think that compliance beyond is a little difficult, but the consequences of not complying with these new regulations issued by the Treasury Department are pretty serious. So we want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. We have with us tonight, we have David Sprott and Audrey Edwards from the McMahon law firm, and they kind of contacted us and said this is something that people in the business world really need to know about if they have corporations, LLCs, and smaller entities. And so we're glad to have them here this evening. We are, if you would like to go ahead and get started with it, we'll kick this thing off.
Okay. As David said, my name is David Sprott. This is my colleague, Audrey Edwards. We're glad to have the opportunity to present this important information to you. We're going to go over sort of the overview of the Corporate Transparency Act. And of course, it wouldn't be a presentation by lawyers if I didn't give a bit of a disclaimer at the beginning. What we're giving you is a general overview, and it should be construed to be specific legal advice to your situation. But we will be happy to answer some questions at the end. But there again, you can only do so really based on kind of the general concepts of the Corporate Transparency Act. And so with that, we'll get right into it. Maybe. There we go. So what is the Corporate Transparency Act? Well, it's a lot of things, but for what we're going to talk about this evening, it's specifically about a report that many businesses are going to be required to file beginning this year. As it says here, it was enacted in 2021, but most people didn't really know about it at that point because a lot of the requirements didn't go into effect yet. That happened this year. So it's been around for a while, but sort of flying under the radar. The goal is to aid law enforcement in combating illicit activity conducted through anonymous shell companies. So you may not realize this, but in some states, there are ways you can form an entity, and really it's hard or almost impossible to know who owns the entity or who's responsible for it. That's not as much true in Texas. We have public information reports that have to be filed with the Secretary of State, which allows us to have a little bit better knowledge of who are the people involved in all of the business entities within our state. But this is a nationwide law, so that all the states will have to sort of come out of hiding it against, or at least the entities that are filed in those states. What does it mean? Certain entities are going to have to file what are called beneficial ownership information reports, which are abbreviated BOI, to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which we call FinCEN for short. And the information that's in those reports is stored in FinCEN, and it's going to be used by law enforcement for things like money laundering, organized crime. You know, if there are people doing bad things through business entities, they want this information to be able to see who might be involved with this business.
So as we start to talk more about the specific requirements of the Corporate Transparency Act, there are three key terms that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about what a reporting company is, who are company applicants, and who are beneficial owners. Now, we're going to go into more detail on these three, but one key distinction I want to get in your heads right now is that the reporting company always refers to the business entity, whereas company applicants and beneficial owners always refer to living, breathing people. And so if we're talking about those two terms, get in your head, that are living, breathing people, and the reporting company is the entity itself.
So what is a reporting company? Are you involved? Do you own a reporting company? Are you an employee of a reporting company? It's a domestic entity formed by filing a document with the Secretary of State. So if you are an LLC, a corporation, a limited liability partnership, anything where you file a certificate of formation with the Secretary of State, then that is a domestic entity formed by a filing document as defined here. Or a foreign entity registered to do business by filing a document with the Secretary of State. So that's probably not true of anyone here, but an out-of-country entity that's doing business here, they have to file certain documents to register to do business in Texas or in any state for that matter. So it includes those companies as well. It is the reporting companies that have the responsibility to file the beneficial ownership information reports, the BOI reports. So that's also important to note, although there could be liability for any players in this, but it is the reporting company that has that responsibility.
So these entities listed here are entities that are not considered reporting companies. And so if your business falls into any of these categories, you're not subject to the Corporate Transparency Act requirements, and you do not have to file a beneficial ownership information report. The first one is if you did not file a formation document to create your business, then you don't have to file these reports. And so an example of that would be sole proprietorships, or if you have a general partnership, those entities do not fall within the scope of this act. Another one that might be more common is large companies, and there are very specific requirements for this. You have to have more than 20 full-time employees, a physical office in the US, and then more than $5 million in gross receipts that you reported on your most recent federal tax return. The whole statute actually has 23 categories of exemptions in total. Most of those are based off of the industry. So banks, heavily regulated finance companies, public accounting firms, those sorts of entities may be exempt under this act. But as well, there's also a tax exempt entity. So if you have a 501c3 nonprofit that has been recognized by the IRS, that entity is exempt. Another one is inactive entities. This is very, very, very limited and precise scope. Essentially, if you have more than $1,000 in a bank account, you're not inactive. You've exceeded that threshold and you're going to have to report. But it's something to keep in the back of your mind if you've got an entity that is going to be filing for bankruptcy or just shutting down and it's just sort of hanging out there. Another one that's not listed here, but wholly owned subsidiaries of most types of exempt entities are also exempt as well. So if you have an exempt entity that owns another exempt entity 100%, you will be exempt. Finally, to note there, the other exemptions are listed in the Small Entity Compliance Guide. This is an important resource for you to remember as a small business owner. Benson has published this Small Entity Compliance Guide, and it's on their website. They update it regularly. It's extremely helpful and goes into these exemptions and the requirements of this act more thoroughly. And so if you have questions that you want to look into this further, that will be one of the best places that you can go to get the most recent and up-to-date information on your own. One final thing to note about these exemptions is you can lose these exemptions. So for example, if you have an LLC in Texas, you are currently a large company, you have 25 employees, you make $6 million in revenue, you're good. Let's say 3 years from now, another pandemic hits and you have to lay off 10 of your employees, your revenue dips down because it's the pandemic. Suddenly, you have lost your exemption and you will need to file a beneficial ownership information report. So it's important to keep in mind that even if your entity is exempt now, that you need to keep track of that because in the future, you could lose that if you don't meet those precise requirements anymore.
And there's no penalty if you think you're exempt, but if you go ahead and file the return, they're not going to read it. So now, who are beneficial owners? These are the people that have to be listed as the owners of the company or the reporting company. And there are two ways that you can be a beneficial owner. And don't let the word owner trip you up, okay? Because you don't have to be an actual owner, have an ownership stake in a reporting company to still have to be listed as a beneficial owner. So that would be people with substantial control. Usually they do have some ownership, but senior officers, if you hold the title of CFO or CEO or president or something like that, where you're somebody in charge at your company, but you don't have the requisite ownership percentage, you're still a beneficial owner. You're going to have to be listed on there. Substantial control can be exercised through board representation or voting rights of members of board of directors, intermediary entities, or financing arrangements or contracts. So there's lots of different ways that you could potentially have substantial control. If in doubt, as I said, they don't penalize you for providing more information than what you're required to provide. The other category of beneficial owners is the 25% or more ownership interests. So this is what you typically think of as, well, somebody who has an ownership stake. They have a decent percentage ownership in it. Ownership is calculated based on federal tax classification, and if you have futures or options, then those are treated as if they're exercised. So you need to keep that in mind if that's a part of your company. And then for partnerships, here's sort of a guideline for how to calculate the ownership. An individual's ownership interest as the individual's percentage of the total outstanding capital and profit interests of the company. So if you're a partner who is entitled to 30% of the profit distribution, obviously that's more than 25%. And so you're a beneficial owner. For corporations, there's two different ways to calculate that. It would be the percentage of the total outstanding voting power of all classes of ownership interest entitled to vote. In other words, all types of stock. Or it could be the percentage of the total outstanding value of all classes of ownership. So if you don't have the requisite percentage necessarily of all the stock, but your stock has more value to it because of the rights associated with it, then you could be a beneficial owner. So who is a beneficial owner can be a little bit tricky. And so it's something that you should consider carefully. And as Audrey mentioned, there is a small entity compliance guide that has more details than what we can go into this evening, giving you just an overview that would be very helpful to look at when you have questions about this. And that's available on the FinCEN website, and we'll give you that address as we later on in the presentation.
So the final term to know for the Corporate Transparency Act is company applicant. And this one is a little bit simpler than the beneficial owners because currently on the report, you can only have two. This is capped out. You can have no more than two. Another reason why this is easier is because if your entity was formed before 2024, you don't have to report this at all. And so if your entity wasn't formed in January of this year, as of right now, you can ignore that for existing entities. Another reason why company applicants are simpler is later on when we talk about updating these reports, you do not have to update the report for company applicants. It's just a one-time report. Now, who is the company applicant? This is two people. It's the person who directly files the document that formed your entity, and it's the person who is responsible for directing or controlling the filing of that document. So we as lawyers, one of our most common services we provide is helping clients like yourself set up business entities. And so in that case, I might fill out the paperwork for the certificate of formation, and then I'd hand it off to my legal assistant, and my legal assistant would upload it in the Secretary of State's website, and she would click send. In that example, we would both be company applicants. I would be the person who was responsible for directing or controlling the filing, and my legal assistant would be the point person who actually directly filed that document. And so both of our information would need to be listed in this report for our client. As I said, the key thing to remember about company applicants is they're only reported if your entity was formed after January 1st, 2024. And so if you have a pre-existing entity, that's not something you need to worry about.
As a point of clarification, you still have to file a form, you have to report the company.
Yes, you just leave the company applicant part blank. Next up, what gets filed? So for the company itself, the business, when you file a beneficial ownership information report, you will report that listed information. So all names and trade names as well. So if you filed an assumed name certificate or you have a DBA, you'll need to list all of those out in the beneficial ownership information report. You'll have to have the address of the principal place of business, and this does need to be a physical location, your tax identification number, and the jurisdiction of formation. For the people, the individuals, your beneficial owners, and if you were formed in 2024 or beyond, the company applicants as well, you'll need their names, dates of birth, the address. For beneficial owners, that has to be a residential address. But for the company applicants, if your business is formed after 2024, that can be a business office address. You also have to have an image of an identifying document like a driver's license or a passport, and then you have to type in some of the information from that identifying document. So that identification number will be typed in manually, as well as having the image. If you're concerned about images because you're not particularly tech savvy, in filling out the form, they have very clear instructions about what types of images are acceptable, and they will accept common image formats like a JPEG, and they'll give you information about the size. And so the uploading the image part isn't particularly tricky or challenging. We think one of the biggest challenges will just be collecting this information, because if you have, 5 or 6 executive officers in your business, or you have, a whole family owns it, and you've got 15 family members, and you've got to track them all down and get their driver's licenses. And so that the website itself and the application itself is the easier part. And David's going to talk more about the active filing.
Okay, so how to file, and this may be a little bit smaller than I meant for it to be, but there is the web address for filing this, for the filing website. It's boiefiling.finesin.gov/file BOIR. You can also get to that from the FinCEN website. They have a homepage that's all about BOI, and there's a link to this filing page right here. But what I wanted to show you is that you have 2 different ways that you can file the report. The first one is file a PDF BOIR. And so you download from their website a PDF form that you type in the information about your company applicant if you have to, and then all the beneficial owners. It's a really cool form. I've played with it some. It's very sophisticated. You can actually upload and attach the images of the driver's licenses to the PDF itself. And you can click add another beneficial owner, and it adds another page for you to do that. So it's pretty neat. I believe it allows you to add up to 99 beneficial owners. So for most small businesses, that's more than enough room. The other option is to file it online. So without a PDF, just a screen, a form on the web where you type in the information and then hit submit. I guess we'll see which way becomes more popular after looking at both. My preference is the PDF, because I can save the PDF to my computer, to my PC. And then if I have to update the information, then I already have the information there in the PDF, and all I have to do is change it and resubmit it, as opposed to typing everything in again to do an updated report, which would be what you would do if you were filing it online. Because there's no way to pull up. It's not like you set up an account for your company and where you can just pull it up and change certain information. If you file a change report, you're filing a brand new report that replaces the old one. So for those reasons, for right now, I prefer the PDF method. should I apply for a FinCEN ID? It'll ask you that in the forms. And well, what is a FinCEN ID? It is a unique ID number where you can put in your information, your address, name, driver's license number, image of your driver's license, and it will generate back to you a FinCEN ID number. I did this and hit submit, and within a millisecond, it popped back up with my FinCEN ID. So it's very easy to get it. Now this one, you do have a sign-in to the government website. So if you need to change your information on your FinCEN ID, you have a new address or something, then you can update that without getting a new FinCEN ID number. But it's a unique number that you can use. And so if you are someone who has an ownership stake in many different entities, and maybe you're not okay with giving out an image of your driver's license to all of the people that would need that in order to file these reports, you can get a FinCEN ID number and say, I don't need to give that to you. Here's my FinCEN ID number. And if they put that number in, that they don't have to provide all that other information, which whoever's responsible for the company report is probably happy with that as well, because that makes life easier for them. The reason I have one, and probably Audrey has one too, is because if we are giving our information as the company applicant to a client who's filing the report, then, we can just give them the number and don't have to give them an image of our driver's license. And, the picture on mine is not the greatest, so I prefer to give it out to as few people as possible. Companies can also get FinCEN ID numbers, and that might be helpful if you have a company that is an owner of another company. And you have a structure like that where maybe several different companies own several different ones. And so that way, if you update the company information for, say, the parent company, and it has an ownership stake in 5 different companies underneath it, once you've updated the parent company information, like its address or something like that, then it trickles down. You've updated it for everywhere else that FinCEN ID shows up in other reports. So that is why they have them, and that's how they're useful.
So this part, I'm sure many of you are very concerned about the deadline. If you know already that your business is going to have to file this, when do you have to do it? It's based for the initial report, which is the first one you file. You've never filed a previous report. That's your initial report. For the initial report, it's based off of the date that your entity was formed. And so if you were formed before 2024, so anytime in 2023 and backwards, you will have until the end of 2024, December 31st, 2024, to file this report for your company. So you get a year. For those of you that are forming a business this year in 2024, you will have 90 days to file that initial report. And for those of you formed after 2024, so January 1st, 2025 and beyond in the future, those entities will have 30 days to file this report. And one thing to note is when I say filing here for the deadline purposes, I don't mean the date you click submit on the Secretary of State's website. What they're talking about is the date that you receive notice. So you wait, when you file these reports, you file a certificate of formation with the Secretary of State's website. There's like a 2-week waiting period where you're just sitting there checking the status every day. And then the Secretary of State sends you a little email and it says, we filed this for you. Here's the file marked copy. The date of that email is the date that you have. And so it's only until you receive that email back that 30-day or 90-day or 1-year calendar clock starts ticking. The other types of reports that you file, for this act, you have an ongoing obligation to update the report. And so if an owner's address changes, if your business adopts a new assumed name or DBA, you have to go back in and update the report. You have 30 days from the change to update the report. If you, for some reason, discover that there was a typo in the report or that somebody was using their middle name instead of their legal name when you filled this out and you need to correct that information, again, it's a 30-day timeline to get that updated or corrected. And even if you realize that you're outside, there was a huge mistake and you're correcting it, 60 days after you filed the report, there's a certain grace period in the statute to help protect people from liability if it's an innocent mistake and you correct it. So if you know you make a mistake, the best practice would be to update that as quickly as possible, regardless of that timeline. Finally, liability and penalties. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the government wants to hold people liable for this. And so they drafted this really broad language, and you can read that there to the left about, who's liable. And it says, it's illegal for any person to willfully provide false information or fail to complete the report. Really what this comes down to for your business is that willfully. If you don't intentionally violate this act, you can't be liable. And so conversely, if you know you're filing the wrong address from somebody because they just don't want to provide the right one, you shouldn't do that. You'll be liable under this. Liability in this case means a civil penalty of up to $500 per day that the information is false or incomplete, or criminal penalties of up to $10,000 and a fine or 2 years in prison. Right now, with this act just coming out and effective in January, we don't really have much information about how this will be enforced, whether there will be audits or how FinCEN's going to know things are incorrect. But as that's updated, I'm sure that information will be added to the small business compliance guide, so you can keep updated to yourself as FinCEN starts making those decisions and taking those actions.
Yes, and so I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but because you've come to this seminar, now you know the law exists, so you're all willfully not complying if you don't file it. Other resources, I mentioned that there's the FinCEN website. They really did a good job providing information to the public on how to comply with this. And that's the address, www.fincen.gov/BOI. So it's not a difficult web address either. Within that, there's the small entity compliance guide. It's, about 25 pages?
Something like that. And it's got tables and charts and little checkboxes to go through all the exemptions. And so if you have a specific question, who is the beneficial owner? Is my entity exempt? They've got like a table or a chart in there for it that you can just check off the boxes and go through. And so it's very thorough. They also have a helpful FAQ section as well that might answer a specific question that you have. And we found it to be a good resource. And I've read the language of the statute, and I think it's a good
And then there's our contact information if you want to contact us. If you have any other questions, our law firm does provide services for filing these reports. We're not sure who all will provide those services going forward. I've heard some accounting firms are providing those services as well. If you're a small entity, I would encourage you to just pull up the form and play with it a little bit and see if it's something that you could do yourself. It sounds complicated, but if you are a mom and pop shop and it's just, 2 or 3 owners and a simple LLC, I think most people can file the report on their own, and I would encourage you to give it a try. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And if you have any questions now, we'll be happy to do what we can. Yes, sir.
I have several, if you don't mind. First of all, the situation is a moving target. It's year after year, you have to analyze this, correct? And I'm a CPA. I know already they're on the tax software. They're asking, they're giving us a diagnostic about it, even though it's not. You need to do it right now. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's already out there. But basically the trigger is following with Secretary of State. That's a trigger unless you meet that threshold of the 20 employees and the $5 million.
Or one of the others, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Excuse me?
Or one of the other exemptions, yeah.
My question is, say if the attorney's preparing the organization documents and files the state, files the Secretary of State, but the CPA actually secures the EIN number. Mm-hmm. Is that securing the EIN number for that client a reason for them to be the
Company applicant?
Yeah.
No, it's the person filing the formation document.
Okay.
So a CPA obtaining the EIN is off the hook for having to be reported on the report. But you do bring up a good point in that you have to put the EIN on your report. So if you're a new company, it's important to obtain that EIN quickly because once we get past this year, it's a 30-day deadline to get the report filed after your form.
And I will add to that, the online, I know David has filed for EINs before, and the online will spit you out an EIN number instantly if you file for an EIN online. If you file paper, I think the last time I checked it was 6 to 8 weeks if you want a paper file for an EIN. So if you know you're forming a new entity and you're going to be subject to that 30-day deadline, probably best to do it online to get the EIN in time. I don't know many people that will file by paper, but sometimes you will. And so that's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind.
And I say that there are people out there who want to charge you for doing applying for an EIN number. If you go to the IRS website, irs.gov, it's free and it takes 15 minutes to fill it out, name, address, email address, and all that. And within instantly, you'll have that ID number. And so just do the online application.
It is easy, although there are times though when you're filling it out that you have to answer questions that will lock you into how you're going to report your taxes, what kind of taxing entity you're going to be. So you may need to ask some questions of your attorney or your CPA before you do that.
And second, my last question is if you say have entities doing it themselves, a person, and they're a managing member of the LLC, for instance, and then they select another person to be the registered agent for that entity. Is that registered agent automatically a company applicant?
No, a registered agent wouldn't be and wouldn't necessarily be a beneficial owner if all they're doing is being a warm body at an address to receive mail or to receive services process. No, they wouldn't.
I have a question on something you said. If you have 99 owners, threshold is 25%, right?
Right.
So 99 owners, one of them would own 25%, the rest of them would own 0.01.
Well, you'd have a lot of sheets in the kitchen if you had 99 owners because the ownership is 25% or substantial control. So you can have zero ownership interest in a company, but because of the authority that you have within the company, you still have to be listed as a beneficial owner. Yes, in the back.
My understanding that if you follow, if you meet the parameters, you have to file the form, you file it correctly, these are some assumptions. Everything goes in right, then there's no maintenance if nothing changes within your company. So you don't have to go back in, there's not another filing date that you have to go in and recertify that all of this is correct every year.
That is true.
Once you send it, you're done.
That is true. If nothing changes, you don't have to file any sort of an update to the report, which is a double-edged sword because you may not remember that you filed that 15 years ago, and then there is a change in your company and you forgot to file something stating what the change is. But the good news is, yeah, it's not something like the Texas public information report that you have to file or recertify every year. So it depends on how you look at it, but yes, it's not something that you have to constantly do, but there's also not a reminder there to check the information. So you have to put a reminder for yourself to do that. And the deadline to file a report is 30 days after a change. So, you know, that can be hard to remember sometimes to address that issue. Yes, sir.
So is the trust required to file the report?
There are special rules for trusts. So, for example, there are special in Texas. Our trusts are not formed by filing paperwork with the Secretary of State. So, generally, our trusts would be off the hook. But sometimes you might have a business owned by a trust, and then there are special rules to identify well who's the beneficial owner. You know, you ignore that entity of a trust. You would ignore the trust and look to, okay, sometimes the trustees, sometimes the grantor, sometimes beneficiaries. There are very special rules. They're very niche about it. And that's something I believe the small entity compliance guide addresses, but that's an area that's very, very specific. If you're dealing with shares of a corporation held in trust or LLC membership interests held in trust, that can get challenging. But just the trust itself, no, it's not. If you're in Texas, you probably didn't file paperwork to form that, but you didn't register with the Secretary of State, so you're not an entity, you're not a reporting company for the purposes of this act, even though you might file tax returns with the IRS. And it's different, it's not quite the same.
David, we got a couple questions online.
Okay.
One of them is, if I represent a tax exempt entity, do I have to file anything to claim the exemption?
You can. You can actually go in and claim the exemption, but if it's an exempt entity that's already been exempt this whole time, you're not obligated to just give them the heads up of, hey, I'm now exempt, I'd like to claim that.
Okay. And what happens if you don't update your report? How will they know?
Great question. We don't know.
That there will be probably some cross-referencing between the FinCEN data and the IRS or other sources of information that the government has. My suspicion, but this is just guesswork on my part, is that they're not going to know if you took too long to file an updated report unless your company or someone within your company is under investigation. So if you have a member of your company that's, a little bit on the shady side, you want to definitely be sure you get things updated in case that person is going to be under investigation for something. Sometimes that happens.
Good.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that the beneficial owners have to put their physical address.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to find out how to move, you would have to update this.
Yes.
Okay. Second question, I've got a sole proprietorship LLC. I'm the sole owner, but my wife is a beneficiary and she has control over some of the bank accounts in case something happens to me. Do I need to list her as a beneficial owner or anything like that in the document?
So one of the unique aspects of Texas law that some of you married folks might be familiar with is we're a community property state. And so that gets a little complicated with this act because that doesn't specifically address community property laws and how that might impact. And so going back to what David said, generally if there's a question like that where you're dealing with a joint ownership situation in any way, the safest practice now is to go ahead and report that, or you can always seek out, if your CPA deals with this or a lawyer to help address those questions more further. Because once it gets down into the nitty gritty, there are a lot of little details that might nudge you in one direction.
But to get more specific on his question, if you're a single member LLC, you still have to file this report. Even though you report for IRS and sole proprietorship.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true. Even if you're a single member LLC, you do have to file the report and report yourself as a beneficial owner. If you were coming to me for advice on who else should file, if you're a married person, I would say even if you have on paper that you own 100% of the LLC membership interest, you should list your spouse too, because they have a 50% interest under state law.
But if that single member has over 20 employees and over 5 million, they're exempt, right?
Well, that's true. Yes. Yes.
So it's not just,
I'm talking more on the smaller entities.
So in taxes, is a disregarded entity considered exempt?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that was a no.
David, on the joint property, does that expand to common law as well?
Like a common law marriage?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, a common law marriage is a valid marriage in the state of Texas, so yes, it would. In the back again, yes, sir.
Which governmental bureaucracy or entity or whatever you want to call them is going to be responsible for enforcing compliance?
Department of Treasury.
So through the IRS?
Through FinCEN itself, it
will be fenced in. It's going to be ultimately.
Yes.
So they're gonna hire a bunch of auditors?
I can't answer that right now. Yeah. I can't even guarantee how long this law will last, but we have it for now, and so we're stuck with complying.
I just like to make a comment on filing, and we here at the SBDC work with a lot of people applying for TBD loans and idle loans, and they have a deadline. Everybody went to the website at the last minute to try to apply for this information. The website crashed. And I would suggest that you not wait till the middle of December to begin trying, because of the possibility that everybody in America that has a small business trying to do this, I would trust that website to be able to hold all the applications. And I think that I can see a problem with that.
And to add to what you're saying, I told you the deadline, that's the last day you have to file. If you know your entity is going to be subject to it, you just want to get it out of the way now, you can always file early. There's no waiting period or anything like that. So you can go ahead and file as soon as you have that information if you want to try and avoid a last minute scramble.
Yeah, that portal opened January 1st, as I understand it, from here on out. But I wouldn't wait till the last minute. I would strongly suggest that you get that done quickly or as soon as possible.
So if you're borderline on the revenue thing, you have the number of employees, but if you're fluctuating in the revenue thing, you probably want to do your 23 tax return first before you file this, because you'll know if you're over 5 million.
That's true.
And that's a challenge with that large operating company, especially if you know you're in that large operating company. Really keep an eye on those metrics, the number of full-time employees, the revenue that you're reporting to the IRS, because if that fluctuates and you're right on that edge, you might have years where you're exempt and years where you're not.
Deferred income.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. If you're a company that's in that position, you have my sympathy, because you'll be constantly looking, do I have enough employees? Did I have enough, in gross income for this year to be exempt? And as I mentioned, there's no penalty for filing the report, even if it turns out you're exempt. I mean, you may get some complaints from people who don't want to provide that information and think it's unnecessary, but there's no penalty with the government.
To add to that, on the flip side is, let's say you've got a business that's starting up now. It's definitely not at 5 million in revenue and 20 employees, but a few years down the line, you become exempt, you meet that threshold. You can go onto FinCEN's website and file a report, and all you have to do is check a little box that says, I'm now exempt, and let FinCEN know I'm no longer subject to these requirements.
Let's just say the employee side of it, 25 employees, and that's the make or break it metric. If you just hit 25 at any point during the year, or is it 25 at the end of the year? 20%? We run through all this with the CARES Act, so this is why I'm asking this. Is there a point in there? I mean, if you just reach that threshold, but then you come back down the next month under it, are you still gonna have to?
I mean, you might have 5 employees all year, but if you run a business anywhere in America over the last 5 years, people come and go and change jobs, and you might have 5 employees, but you might have 75 different people in that 5 employee position in a year. Fast food restaurant.
We've been run through this ringer already. So
my understanding is that you need to have the requisite number all at one time. And so once you reach that number and you have that gross income, and meet all those other requirements, then you can file an updated report that says this company is now exempt. But if the number of employees you currently have on payroll dips below that, then you have to file another updated report that says, now I'm not exempt anymore, and here's the updated report.
And to add to that, full-time employees, they want you to use full-time for IRS purposes. And so I know sometimes full-time employees can be different in different contexts. And so if you're sort of on that verge where you've got a lot of people working like 39.5 hours a week, that's something you'll want to double check as well, whether they're considered full-time for the purpose.
yeah, and are they full-time equivalents? And how did is there anything in there that defines a full-time equivalent?
There might be. I mean, we haven't Yeah, we don't have all the information on all of the definitions of the terms to provide to you, but there.
And I can actually
Might.
employ, it actually cites I think the IRS, there's like an actual citation for it, for the definition. And so you would then go over to the Internal Revenue Code and start playing around with that to look at that specifically. The CPAs in the room might be more familiar with that definition and all of its nuances.
Civil and criminal penalties are subject to those that don't file, and they're supposed to file correct.
Correct.
Okay, so therefore, if you are an inception company and you have to file the first year and you start growing, and if you wait 2 years to file an exemption as opposed to waiting 1 year to file an exempt status, that is penalized, does it?
There's no requirement that you tell them that you're exempt. There's no reason not to, because you don't want them to think that you're not exempt. But in that case, because the law didn't require you to file a report, you wouldn't be able to be liable. It's only liability for failing to file a report when you were supposed to, or filing false information.
But having a report that changes your status is only a requirement if you have to file, and it's not a requirement if you don't, if you are exempt.
Correct.
Yeah.
You talked about the willful, willfully not.
Mm-hmm.
There are millions of businesses, or hundreds of thousands of businesses, because they don't know anything about this. They probably won't know anything about this before the end of the year. And they go along and they're supposed to file. Are they exempted until they say, oh, I didn't know, you know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I mean that if the government wants to prosecute someone for violating this law, then they have to prove in court that the person who violated it willfully did so. So they would have to point to some evidence of how they knew about the law and failed to, and made a choice to willfully not comply with it. So it would be difficult in those situations to.
What would we invited y'all? I just
Well, next. To break it to you. So yeah. So Fred, the attendant.
Side note, of course, in that situation is, if you're the person who they're suddenly saying did file a report, you've got to hire a venue. That's going to get expensive and cost you time and money. And so, to the extent that you can keep yourself out of the courtroom in the first place, that would be the best practice for your business.
These were some good questions you had for it.
Mm-hmm.
We like being all of you.
There's not a filing fee. That's another good question. Yeah, no filing fee. If you want to get the FinCEN ID, again, no filing fee, but you do have to sign up for a username and password. It's your email address. And it's not if you have an ID me sign in, it's not like that where you have to, prove your identity. I know when I did the ID me, when I had to actually have a Zoom interview with a government agent who asked me all kinds of, questions that only I would know the answer to. It's not that. It's just, it sends you an email and asks you to click a link to confirm that email, and then you can set up the password, and then you can do your FinCEN ID application, and then you can use that same login to go and change it if you want to. But no fee involved.
Questions? If not, we'll hang around here for a little bit if anybody wants to ask any other questions or anything like that. We appreciate you all coming. We do a series of workshops throughout the year. Usually we do anywhere from 6 to 8 workshops on various topics, business topics. So welcome to come and call off and sign up to attend these workshops for free of charge. And we try to encourage entrepreneurship in the Abilene and surrounding counties. And we do not charge for service. As you know, working with me at Comic, I charge people $300 or $400 to run it free. Anyway, it's a pleasure having you all here tonight. And if you have any questions, go hang around a little bit. Otherwise, I guess we're done.